I said I wouldn't do it until it was at least 10,000 miles old. But here I am at 7,500 miles. I just tuned my Golf R.
Okay, now when you say tune, there's like a couple of different ways to interpret that when you're talking about the Golf, because they have several levels of tuning. There's software tuning. You got to break it down for me.
It's weird, right? So people say, oh, I've gone stage 1, I've gone stage 2, all this kind of stuff. So I've gone stage 1 with an equilibrium tune. I was at a car show at the weekend at the local tuning house in Raleigh, Black Forest Industries. I took the R32 down there and exhibited that off in their kind of main like exhibitor area, and I took the R down there as well. And nobody was interested in that one because it's too new and too common. But I got talking to a few guys about tuning options and stuff like that, and someone was selling what's called a cob access port. This is a tiny little cell phone sized computer that you plug into the OBD2 port of your car. I then paid $175 to a company called Equilibrium Tuning to purchase a staged tune map. So what they do is they go into the ECU and they remap all the valve timings and injections and all that kind of stuff. And so it takes the car from being a 280 horsepower car to being a 370 horsepower car.
What?
With no hardware mods required.
No way.
It's insane.
That's remarkable. I did something similar to my RV, and I think I got like a 10 horsepower improvement. 10.
These 4-cylinder 2-litre turbo engines that are in the Golf, it's the same engine as is in your GTI. The only difference with the R is there's an uprated turbo, so it's a bit of a bigger turbo, and the R is all-wheel drive versus your front-wheel drive. I tell you, if you've never got into tuning and you want to talk to someone about it and you've been thinking about it, I would love to talk to you on Discord. I won't take up too much more of the show about it, but just to say I'm giddy with excitement with the possibilities that this has unlocked for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so can I flash my GTI with software update in theory and see some sort of improvement too?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Oh, boy, it's getting dangerous. I think it's just about as much horsepower as you'd want with a two-wheel drive car. But, of course, what do I know? But to me, it seems like it. It seems like if you get much more, I'd want to go all-wheel drive. That's so awesome. I remember when I flashed my RV's ECU, it went from like it was a drive that you could do, you were driving a bus to it felt like I was driving more of a truck, and that was a nice improvement just because the biggest change for me was it meant I could get on the on-ramp.
That's just it. Yeah.
At speed. And I just had her checked. It's been flashed for probably 3 years now. And I just had her checked yesterday and she just passed all her checks. She's
excellent.
Healthy as can be. Yeah.
Made it back from California in one piece.
Yeah, we did. And now it's weird because we basically moved out to get some work done and I had to rip out the Wi-Fi network. And of course my Raspberry Pi server died, so all of my services were down, and I had to shut down my Pi hole. And it's just strange. It doesn't quite feel like home anymore because I don't have control over everything that I want. And
home is where the Wi-Fi is, right?
Yeah, I don't have Wi-Fi. I don't have internet. It's so strange. So after tonight's episode, after we're done recording tonight, I'm going to go home, I hope, and get like the Pi hole and get the Wi-Fi back online.
Well, I couldn't quite believe it when you messaged me this week and said that your Home Assistant Yella has finally shown up.
It's ridiculous. It's here at perfect timing.
Ridiculous.
It's perfect timing, right? Because the Raspberry Pi died on the road trip. I get home from the road trip and the Yellow's there on the porch waiting for me.
Yep.
I saw the shipping notification, so I also ordered a 1 terabyte NVMe stick. So I've already opened up the Yellow once and I've installed an NVMe drive. I have a quick pile of hardware here, Alex. Before I get to the Yellow, I want to mention what I was going to use. This is a really cool piece of hardware that's been ruggedized, industrialized, can get into super hot conditions, and it's an Intel Atom system with QuickSync that's out of a Tesla solar wall that I picked up on the road trip from a listener. It's decent. Like you could even run a full Linux desktop on it, and it only takes about 5 watts idle. So this is where I was considering going. The only problem with this box, and I'm probably still going to use it, I love that it's DC too, and it's got 2 COM ports, which is amazing.
Is that an XT60 connector I see on the power cable?
Yeah.
Now I know who gave it to you.
Yeah. And I'm probably going to use this for something else, but it's such a cool little box. I thought, okay, I've got an option now, right? So this was one of my options, and it's an x86 box, good power draw. Then the Yellow arrived. Now, I have to say I'm very impressed. I think the Home Assistant team did a good job with the case. I've taken it apart a couple of times. It goes right back together. I can get access to it really quick. They have the logo for Home Assistant ingrained in the casing.
Laser etched up there. Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah. And all the ports are on the back. The compute modules just popped right in. My NVMe popped right in. I think this is going to be how I will do Home Assistant in the RV is on a dedicated machine. I'm going to have a dedicated machine for Home Assistant, and I'm going to have an application server for all my other stuff. So Home Assistant Yellow will run all of the automations in Jupes. And, this Yellow has got eMMC for storage for the primary OS, and they've got NVMe expansion. I don't really know how you use that, but it's in there. So it's going to give me, I expect at least 5 years of runway with that device. But then, on your encouragement, and I didn't expect this for like a month, I also picked up the Odroid H3 Plus that they announced shortly after our last episode. It arrived today, just a little bit before the show. It's still in the packaging.
Oh, you went for the Plus, huh?
Of course.
Of course. Yeah. Who am I talking to? Sorry, I forgot myself for a hot second.
Now, I'm showing Alex on the camera, but I'll describe it to you. But check this out, Alex. So here it is. It's got 2 Ethernets. It's got 4 USB-A. It's got USB-C, DC barrel power connector. It has audio out ports, including optical audio out, and it has HDMI and DisplayPort. Plus, it has an Intel chip on here. It's got a pretty meaty heatsink on it. And on the bottom, it's got 2 slots for RAM and a slot for an NVMe disk. And the killer feature for me, 2 SATA ports on the board. That's massive. That's a game changer for me because I've been using USB storage forever.
Welcome to the world of real hardware, dude.
I'm so excited. I'm so pleased. Oh, I think it's going to be perfect. So this is what will replace my Raspberry Pi 4, and I'm going to run all my applications and more, right? Because I've got more horsepower here, and it's got QuickSync as well. I got to get some RAM ordered for it. I didn't expect it to arrive this soon, so I haven't ordered anything for it.
What type of RAM? Is it laptop style, the smaller stuff?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's the small stuff. I think it's DDR4.
Do I recall reading that thing will take up to 64 gigs of RAM?
Yes, I believe that is the case. I should have grabbed the specs before the show. I'm so excited. It's funny, right? Because when the Pi 4 died, I was like, crap, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have nothing I want to replace this with. I'm like, I guess I could build it around another Pi 4 again, but then I'm not really I'm going through all this work and I'm not getting a performance upgrade. And then this thing shows up just a little bit after last episode.
Yeah, it's perfect timing.
They actually shipped it. I got it. I can't believe it. I think what I want to do is first is I want to load desktop Linux on here just to see what it's like, and then I'll wipe it off immediately and start building, I think, a NixOS server.
I mean, it looks amazing, and I shared it with you for this exact reason. It's got a passive heatsink on it, so it can run completely silently, which is perfect for a small space like the RV.
Yes, totally.
The only thing I would change about it, and I don't have one, but the only thing I would change about it is the fact that both of those NICs are Realtek 2.5 gig NICs. I would have preferred 2 Intel NICs just simply for better hardware compatibility reasons. Realtek's probably fine, but if ever I've had a NIC issue in the past, it's been not an Intel NIC and a Quantia or a Realtek or something like that. Whereas Intel NICs just work and it takes all the problems away. But anyway, I'm nitpicking. Otherwise, it's a fantastic looking board.
I imagine they'll be fine, but I also 100% agree with you. I would also prefer that. Though, I'm just excited to have a NIC that isn't on the USB bus. So, that's good too. I don't think it was for the Pi 4, but it is for most of the Pis. And if you wanted to ever add a secondary NIC to the Raspberry Pi to use it for a firewall or something like that, you would be doing that over USB. So for me, it's like, okay, at least they're on the PCI bus. And then it would be nice if they were Intel, but I'll take on the PCI bus.
So what are you going to run on it? Proxmox and then virtualize like Home Assistant that way, or?
Oh, I should consider Proxmox, huh? Well, I'm still kind of subscribed to the no container theory for a lot of this stuff, and NixOS would be really good for that. But it does make a lot of sense to have Proxmox sitting on there. And I shouldn't have any problem passing QuickSync through, right? That should be fine. So
what would you need to pass it through for?
Plex.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come on to this topic later in the show because it's actually been coming up quite a lot in Discord lately about LXC versus Docker versus VMs, all that kind of stuff. We'll come to that later. Please remind me if I forget. But in the meantime, I also saw another update in the news feed this week that I thought would make you a happy little bunny. Apple, with I think iOS 16.1, are actually shipping. It's real. It's really happening, people. They're shipping Matter.
This is my week, man. This is my week. It's all coming together, buddy. And the thing is, they're shipping it on the HomePod. They're updating the HomePod to support Matter. And they just announced today as we record a new Apple TV. And the fancier version that has Ethernet also supports Thread and Matter. So they're, surprisingly going all in, for Apple at least. I don't really know if this changes what I'm going to do hardware-wise in terms of like sensors and devices yet, but I am curious what it means for accessibility of Apple's remote control features to like Home Assistant. Like when Home Assistant gets their hands on this, maybe I'll have remote integrated control even better than I did before without even having to use HomeKit at all or something.
That would be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not.
What's important about this update coming out now, Apple being the first mover, I think, in actually shipping, provider level support for this stuff. It's a very strange place for Apple to be. But anyway, you've already got HomePods, you've already got Apple TVs. So for you could just purchase 1 or 2 Matter devices and kind of dip your toe in nice and early and get a feeling for it without having to spend hundreds or thousands of dollars on all new sensors and all new whatever. And you can just do a couple of things and kind of drip feed this stuff in as support lands in Home Assistant and that kind of stuff.
Which is probably the best way to go, right? Because I guess if history is to be our teacher, it's very possible that the Rev 1 devices could be kind of so-so, and this thing takes a couple of revisions and...
No.
No.
The first iPhone was perfect.
Yeah, right? Right, of course. And the first wireless communications protocols are always perfect, too.
Yeah. I'm seeing the reaction to the H3, the Odroid H3 that we just talked about in the Discord chat. It's probably a good job you got one, because I think half our audience are about to buy one.
I've got to imagine they would be, because it seems like the perfect device for what we do. Low power, but performance where it counts, NVMe storage instead of a eMMC or SSD, and of course, having those 2 SATA ports.
I have a request for you. Could you do some energy monitoring for us and like compare what a Pi draws versus this thing? Because my argument to you for all these years has been, look how much more powerful x86 is for the same power budget. So I'm curious as to what that in reality is. Is that true or not?
Yeah, that's a great thing to check. I will. I'm also wondering, should I figure out what my power budget is? I've always just kind of played fast and loose, 4 Pis down to 2 Pis. So if I look at that, like what would 4 Pis have taken versus having everything on just 2 devices? The yellow, which I expect is going to be, what a CM4 takes plus a little bit more. And then now this H-Droid or Odroid H3, I'm expecting somewhere around 5 to 6 watts idle. And then who knows when it's ramped up. We'll find out.
You just got to figure it out, eh?
Figure it out. Linode.com/SSH. That's where you go to get $100 in 60-day credit on a new account. And it's a great way to support the show while you're checking out a service. It's frankly awesome. We run everything we've built for the last few years on Linode, including our brand new shiny website, jupiterbroadcasting.com, which is kicked off and rebuilt on the regular on Linode, and we are super impressed with the speed. We've integrated it overall with our infrastructure management tools, and you can too. Terraform, Ansible, Kubernetes. It works with all of that. But maybe you're brand new. Maybe you've never done any of this stuff. Linode has what they call an app marketplace. It's basically like one-click deployment for a lot of really great open source applications. And they just recently refreshed their whole approach to Nextcloud. It's got a new feature in the marketplace. They're working with the project. You hit that deploy button, you get a properly set up Nextcloud instance on Linode right away. This week, I'm also just playing around with their GPU instances with a little bit of AI image generation because they got GPU machines. And I'm not going to go build a crazy huge NVIDIA box just to play around with a project, right? But I'll go deploy a Linode for a couple of days. And you can too. With that $100, you can really kick the tires and try just about everything out. From their backups, their S3 object storage, to those powerful CPU or GPU rigs. Or maybe you just want a gaming server, a blog server, or a Nextcloud instance up in the cloud. Well, you'll have full control with Linode, and you'll be super appreciative of their support if you ever run into any problems. I'll guarantee you that. So go try them out and get $100 while you support the show. Linode.com/SSH. That's linode.com/SSH.
I thought I'd continue my journey down the whole home audio rabbit hole exploration, spelunking exercise that I've been doing recently. Lots of people write in, give me lots of excellent recommendations of different things to try. Volumio is still on my list of things to try. However, I thought I would try out the big dog in the room, or in the Roon. The big dog in the Roon.
I see what you did there.
Terrible. I tried out Roon this week for all of you lovely people. I love it. I didn't want to because it's so damn expensive.
Yeah.
But Roon bills itself as the audiophile player for music fanatics. So essentially, you run a piece of software on a NAS or a computer or a server like I have, and it goes through and it catalogs all of your FLAC files, all of your audio. So it can be lossy stuff, it can be lossless, whatever.
All right, that sounds great.
I've got about 250,000 files that I've acquired over the years. A lot of them have ripped, actually, of CD rips I did a decade plus ago. I went before I donated all my CDs to the charity shop. The performance has been fine. It indexed that 250,000 files in, 6 hours or so, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, something like that.
Is this running on a Windows machine, Linux machine, Mac?
I'm running it in a Docker container on my Linux server, but you can run it on a Windows machine too.
So they do offer it as a Docker container.
Yeah, they I don't know if they officially do, but it's certainly possible because it's just a Linux app. The real issue with it though is that to run this server, they charge. I can't believe I'm going to say this. They charge me $10 a month for access to my own files.
Yeah, okay.
It's bring your own streaming service, bring your own music streaming service, essentially. It does have a couple of nice features, like it integrates with Tidal and Qobuz for high-res gap filling in your library. So let's say you're missing an album or a new album came out that you haven't bought yet or something like that. It will automatically go to Tidal and Qobuz if you have an active subscription with those two services and pull it in and fill in the gaps for you, which is really nice. And it tries to automatically prioritize the highest quality version of a track available. So let's say I had an MP3 in my local library, but Qobuz has a high-res mastered version of it. It will play the Qobuz version, which I really liked.
Yeah, that does seem like the way you'd want it. And I guess that $10 is going towards the access to the licenses to stream that stuff automatically?
I guess so, but Roon's killer feature, and I say this genuinely out of love, is the way it presents metadata. So you end up with this kind of like magazine view of an album. So let's say I'm listening to some Led Zeppelin or something, and it shows me Led Zepp 4. That's the best Led Zepp album, in my opinion. And so I go in there and I look at it and I click on one of the tracks and I can see on the credits, all the different people associated with a specific album and, who produced it, who did the mixing for it. And if you're a proper audio nerd, you can go down the rabbit hole really deep, really fast, because each of the names and each of the albums mentioned in the description about this thing is a link. And that's powered on their server side. For example, Steven Wilson is one of my personal musical heroes. He's in a band called Porcupine Tree. He's done a bunch of solo stuff as well. And he is probably the most famous musician you've never heard of. Like he works with he does mixes film soundtracks and all kinds of stuff. And so when I dig into Steven's profile, I get to see everything he's associated with and everything he's worked as an engineer on and worked as an editor on. And before you know it, you found 10 new bands you didn't know you liked because it's got some of your favorite influences in. So that's amazing. The way it presents metadata is genuinely Roon's killer feature. The other thing that I like about it is the fact it does multi-room audio, much in the same way as like a Sonos does. You have a little icon in your playback client, and then you can just check a box and suddenly you've got two devices playing in sync. That doesn't sound too incredible until I explain the scenario that really blew my mind. So Roon has this thing called Roon Advanced Audio Transport, RAT. That runs on anything that runs a Roon Ready or a Roon native client. So certain amplifiers have been certified by Roon and by Marantz and Denon and all these big guys. They pay Roon a small fee and they embed the Roon Ready receiver software into their network streamers. You can also run a RAT-ready device on a Windows PC, a Mac computer, an iOS device, a Raspberry Pi. And so you can cast, effectively, it's not quite casting, but you can stream music to any RAT-ready device in sync, no matter what OS it's running. So just paint this, like I've got my iPad out on the deck where I'm grilling some meats. In the lounge next door, I've got a Raspberry Pi plugged into a hi-fi running Linux. In the room next door, I've got my laptop running Mac OS. And all three of those devices are playing audio perfectly in sync that I'm controlling from my iPhone with a single checkbox.
Oh, that is pretty glorious.
That's the dream, isn't it?
Yeah. All the machines, all the speakers, all the OSs.
The catch, and unfortunately, I think there's probably some technical limitations here at play, is that you can only stream like that to devices that are part of the same kind of ecosystem. So I can only group devices that are RAT devices. I can only group Chromecast devices together. I can only group AirPlay devices together. I can't stream to an AirPlay and a Chromecast device at the same time.
Do you have any idea why? That's a pretty interesting limitation.
Well, I mean, AirPlay, the way it buffers the stream is quite different to how Chromecast buffers the stream.
So it's using their native protocols. It's not using like a client on that. Oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Well, that's what the RAT stuff is doing. So the RAT stuff is running a native client on the specific device, so iOS or whatever. And that's why you can't group them together. And I was a little bit deflated to start with when I found that out, because I had this magical vision of all the Google Home Nest Mini hub things I have around the house, and all my computers and everything all working perfectly in sync. And unfortunately, that isn't the case.
Oh. What if you bought the Nucleus Plus, which is their $2,600 server that that you can buy from them?
How do you know this service is aimed at audio files, huh?
How to tell, right?
Jeez.
I mean, it's a cool looking case. I'll give them that.
It's a beautiful ecosystem. Yeah, they've got so you can run this Roon core, this server software. You can run it in a Docker container like I am. You can run it on a Synology, on a computer. But Roon also sell this thing called the Nucleus, and Chris is showing on the stream now something called the Whirlwind, which is a rack mount version of the same thing.
So great. That one's $4,500, by the way.
And you know what's funny is if you actually dig into the specs page on these pages, there is zero information about what CPU is in there.
There is a page where they just say, they have on their partners page, they say they have partnered with Intel.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, who's to say whether it's a Celeron from 2003 or whether it's an Core i7 12th gen? I mean, I imagine it's neither, but we don't know. And that's the point, right? It's a black box, literally.
Yeah, and when you're dropping that kind of cash, I guess, and of course the answer is they're selling this to a market who couldn't care less. We realize that. But it wouldn't kill them to put the specs on there. If you go by the ports, it looks like it's a NUC in there, I have to say.
Yeah. I agree. So, I mean, if we can get over the price of this thing, because I mentioned the monthly price. I didn't mention they also offer a lifetime pass.
Okay.
For $700.
I mean, if you're really stuck with it and they stuck around, you got somewhere between 5 to 10 years out of this, and it had high spousal approval, maybe. I mean, I could see that.
So Roon as a company was founded, I think, in 2015. And so if you'd bought into Roon in 2015 and paid $700, you would only just be breaking even on your monthly subscription. Just put that into perspective. 7 years is a long time for an ROI on that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I wrestled with this pretty hard before I actually tried Roon out. I wanted to hate it because it was expensive. I wanted to hate it because it was closed source. But then I thought, well, so's Plex, isn't it? And you like Plex just fine. And so I kind of came to terms with it and got over myself and thought, yeah, it's fine. You can try it out, and you'll hate it anyway. Oh, I don't. I love it. The trouble is, just as I've been doing this, they've made a big release. They've just released the 2.0, the version 2, which if you're a Roon aficionado is a huge deal. But to me as a newbie, it's just unstable, right? So you're familiar with Plexamp, right? The app that lets you play your Plex music remotely.
Love it.
Roon have just released an equivalent app called Roon Arc, A-R-C. And this lets you access all of your Roon music outside the house. As it stands, the Roon desktop and mobile clients that already existed only worked if you were on your LAN and directly connected to your Roon core. I couldn't get it to work over Tailscale remotely, so Roon Arc kind of bridges that gap for a lot of people. However, this brings us to the cons section of my document. I don't really know how else to say this, but Roon with 2.0 have shot their they're kind of eating their own face, okay? And the reason I say that is because firstly, they're charging me $10 a month for access to my own files, plus the metadata, plus the integrations with Tidal and Qobuz. Okay. However, it gets worse. They guarantee with the 2.0 update 0 minutes of offline playback. If the Roon core cannot connect to the internet, Roon's position is that they guarantee 0 minutes of playback.
Because they don't want to have to pay out when somebody's Wi-Fi goes down or their router takes a crap, something like that, you think?
Well, according to Johnny Darko, who is the source of this information, he spoke to, I think his name is Danny, over at Roon about this. There's a link in the show notes to this video because I couldn't quite believe what I was watching. And, Johnny Darko is a proper audiophile, and I trust his opinion almost implicitly on an awful lot of audio gear, and just I like the way his videos feel. I like the way he presents information. He's a British guy living in, I think, Berlin.
Oh.
So yeah, we've got to stick together, But what's interesting is Johnny is clearly not a techno guy like us, right? And listening to someone who's operating on the edge of their understanding about how some of these technologies on the server side of things work, it's really interesting because it shows you actually that I think Roon are just trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. And I don't say that lightly. And the reason I do say it is because the Roon projects say they're doing this always online connectivity thing for the server because they want to move a lot of the processing to the cloud and to move the product forward and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of the local processing that currently happens on the nucleus, on the Roon core, on my local network is moving into the cloud. And they say that they'll be able to batch stuff up and make it more efficient and kind of, deduplicate a lot of, template matching and all that kind of stuff, which I get, which I understand and does actually make some semblance of sense. However, we're talking about this through a lens of self-hosting, right? That's the name of the podcast, right? Just imagine a situation where your internet goes out for half an hour every day and you suddenly can't play back the files on your NAS under your desk in your basement. It's just unacceptable on a huge number of levels for me personally. And I think despite how much I love Roon so far, and, the 2.0 release has been a little buggy and, not perfect, a little rough around the edges, I just can't adopt a product that costs this much money and compromises on such a fundamental capability like that of an offline self-hosted type product. I just can't.
Yeah, that's a fair point, especially when you consider there's people out there that maybe they're on Starlink and they're having a bad day, or they're on LTE and they're having a bad day.
Or they live in the third world and the entire island is connected through a single satellite type people. That surely is not a big part of Roon's core audience.
Starlink customers, I could see the Starlink customers, though.
Starlink people are out there,
And the thing is like, it's sort of taking away one of the biggest advantages of you collecting all that stuff locally for so many years. And it's just...
At that point, why not just have a Qobuz subscription or a Tidal subscription? What value is Roon adding if I can't even, let's say, one of my friend's dads is out of power for like 8 to 10 days with Hurricane Ian a couple of weeks ago,
Yikes.
It's just no good.
It's no good. For the pricing, especially if you were looking at server hardware, you could almost just afford to just buy sets of speakers for every single room and just put a dedicated hardware device on them and just call it good.
Yeah.
It does sound like it was really nice for a moment, though.
The alternative is Sonos, really, that's got this level of fit and finish and polish and all the rest of it. But Sonos is just hardware. And as we talked about several episodes ago, when Sonos decide that a device is no longer supported, suddenly that perfectly good speaker cone and that perfectly good amplifier unit become a brick thanks to their business model, and
that's a thing.
It's frustrating. So I think that the next one to look at is probably Volumio, although I've heard mixed reports about that, and I certainly don't expect the level of fit and finish I've seen from Roon. The other one to keep an eye on is Plexamp Headless. There's been some pretty good movement over there lately. I think they're working on multi-room audio stuff, but it won't have the Roon audio transport stuff, so I doubt it will be quite as polished again, but who knows? Who knows where this will go? But that's my review of Roon, people.
Fascinating. Thank you for updating us on that. We've been getting a good series of feedback on multi-room audio. It's something people are trying to solve. And I know there's got to be somebody out there that's like, just get a Pi Zero, or something like that. But do you really have time?
Well, Roon, sorry to come back to Roon again, but I'm running one of the playbacks devices is a Ruh-P, a Raspberry Pi running the Roon server.
Right. Okay.
So I am using Raspberry Pi as part of this as well. So, maybe one day I'll find the perfect solution, but I think until Roon guarantee, I don't know, 7 days before the core has to phone home again. It used to be 30 days. The grace period, by the way, with 1.8, which was the previous release, used to be 30 days, and now it's 0 minutes. It's just a hard sell.
Yeah, especially when you're paying $10 a month. Feels like you, when you're paying for something like that that's using your own media, they should give you grace periods like that. 30 days sounds about right. That's about it. I'm going to be buying new gear soon. Cloudfree.shop's where I'll go to check it out. And you can too if you use the promo code SSH. I think you get like $1 off. Light switches coming soon. Cloud-free light switches. Light switches is definitely the way I want to go. And after we get to the feedback today, I think I'm going to be doubling down on Zigbee. I'll tell you more about that later though. Cloudfree.shop. Promo code self-hosted.
Yeah, one of my Shellys just failed actually in the garage. The actual switch, the relay part still works, but when I flick the physical switch in the wall, which in the garage you do all the time, nothing happens. So I've no idea what's happened with that one.
Bummer. It's kind of a pain in the butt to take it out.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about getting one of those Zeus switches that we talked about last episode, but I don't want to go just Z-Wave just for a few light switches. I'd like to stay within the Zigbee universe. So if you have a good Zigbee switch recommendation, please let us know at selfhosted.show/contact.
Speaking of feedback, Docker versus LXC versus a VM. You teased it earlier in the show, and it's been a point of conversation recently.
Yeah, Monkey Angst and I were talking on Discord, and he wrote in saying, I'm trying to decide between using an LXC or another containerization technology. What are you using these days, Alex, and why? Well, the short answer is Docker and more Docker, plus some virtualization, and I think that's and I suppose in the cloud too, there's a couple of things up there. Most of that stuff's running in Docker too. And I'm just going to, preface everything I'm about to say by saying that it's personal choice, and there's more than one way to skin a particular cat in this arena. The way I do it is I run everything in Docker because Docker Compose is awesome.
It's a great way to manage your personal systems. It's a great way to separate, without really having to do much of anything, separate out the application and the data. And just from a system building standpoint, that is a great design practice, and Docker just gives it to you as a general practice.
The other thing about LXCs to consider is that the benefits of them is that it gives you an init system. So for those that aren't familiar, an init system is something like systemd. With a typical Docker container or some kind of other Linux container, what happens is the main process inside that container gets given PID1, process ID 1. And when that PID dies, the container dies with it. The same, by the way, is true of your Linux server or your Linux desktop or whatever you're running Linux on. When PID1 dies, the system dies, and typically that PID1 is systemd these days. In an LXC, what happens is you get an init system like systemd. My biggest gripe with LXC generally, and there's two really. One is that it's an extra layer of complexity that not that many people are using. Some people in our self-hosted community are using it, but generally it's on the fringes compared to the number of people that are using Docker containers. The second thing is that running more than one process in an isolated environment like that is a bit of an anti-pattern. And the reason I say that is because containers are designed to be this black box almost of just a single block with a single purpose. And if you start trying to run more than one service inside that container, so let's say systemd plus a web server, on the face of it, you're only running one service, right? A web server. But actually you're running two. You're running an init system plus a web server, which is a whole bunch of overhead that you A, don't need, and B, technically speaking, is, like I said, a bit of an anti-pattern. And so the other thing it gives you is some issues, well, not issues, it's not the right word, but added complexity around passing hardware through. So like QuickSync, for example, which I think is what we talked about earlier in the show. If you're running QuickSync in a Docker container, it's a couple of lines to pass through the render device. To QuickSync running in Plex or whatever, yeah, it's no big deal. With LXC, there can be some compatibility issues. It's a similar thing. You've got to pass it through, but I can never remember if it has a distinct lock on the GPU once you pass it through to an LXC or not. So somebody in the chat could update in real time. I'd appreciate it. But then the other thing you've got to consider is if you want to run multiple services in one isolated environment, that's exactly what a VM has been designed to do. The tooling around VMs is extremely mature at this point. They're very, very well understood. And I don't know, like LXCs for me fall into this awkward middle ground of not quite knowing who they're for. It's not to say they're a bad technology, because I think LXCs do have their place. They just don't, in my world personally, you know?
Yeah, well, and I think they're also a little more popular in the Ubuntu ecosystem as well, which is probably just not as prevalent in the North America area. So I think there's that element as well. I like what you're saying, though, about VMs, just to step back a little bit there. Your point about the VM is sometimes the right tooling, people shouldn't feel bad about it, I think is underscored by the fact that VM performance is like, it's not your grandpa's VM anymore. On modern hardware with modern virtualization software, VMs can be extremely performant, way better than they were when we were emulating the entire hardware stack. Because these days, not only do we have para-virtualized devices, but there's also just been a lot of plumbing in the kernel to get virtual driver requests to the physical hardware so much faster than, they were even 4 or 5 years ago.
Exactly. I mean, you think about all those cloud servers that are running virtualized stacks. A lot of that investment trickles down to us mere mortals. A lot of those improvements end up in the kernel one way or another. So yeah, the other thing we didn't talk about at all yet is Podman. And I know being a Red Hatter, I should probably be a bit more pro Podman, but for me, the tooling's just still not quite there yet. I rely on Compose all the time for interacting with all of my services. And I know Podman Compose exists, and I've tried it several times, but it's still just...
It's not 100%.
It's not quite there.
Yeah. It's like 90% or so, but it's not 100%. I have the same opinion. I feel like Podman is a better design system architecturally. It feels cleaner. It feels more native as well. But then again, you have like monsters in our chat room that are running Docker in LXC.
Oh my goodness. So. Well, you can run Docker in a VM.
Right. These are the people that show up to our live streams.
Yeah,
Alex.
Right.
I do.
So the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, there you go. Very interesting. I'd love also to hear other people's opinions on it too. So do feel free to go to the contact page or send us a boost. There was discussion going on Reddit that I wanted to just kind of touch on because I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I had something I think is actionable. And the question is, and Alex, I liked this question a lot because it's being honest with themselves. And I think it's something all of us self-hosters should think about. How do I prepare for a time when I'm just tired of tinkering with Home Assistant? That's the question that was on Reddit. And I love it because it's like this guy writes, I've used Home Assistant for the last 6 months and I've had a blast tinkering with the platform. I've got 100 plus devices. Everything is working as intended. And I know from experience, there'll come a time when I just don't find home automation as flattering anymore, but I'll still need my lights and whatnot to function properly. So how do I prepare for this day? This is really, I need to take this advice in as well. Now, I've always remained pretty fascinated. Home Assistant moves quick. The community moves quick. It hasn't lost my attention, but things have. And, we can, as geeks, I think we're just kind of prone to the new shiny sometimes as well. Do you have any hot tips on how to like prepare your infrastructure for when you are bored with it? Do you have anything off the top of your mind?
Don't get bored at the time where it's broken. I don't know. It's such a hard question because I'm aware that the raindrop of inspiration in the desert of computer, there's several things have to line up in order for me to be interested enough to tinker with something. I have to have enough free time in my mind, and I'm always underestimate how long something's going to take. So if I think it's going to take 4 hours, I know I've got to estimate I've got to have a whole day free. And if it's quicker than that, great. I mean, that's often not the case with Home Assistant, but sometimes it is. Probably the best advice I can give, and it's not terribly wisdomful, but is just try and break down the things you're trying to accomplish into small tasks, small batches of stuff. Let's say you want to get a specific room behaving a certain way, or you want to get just a couple of new lights added or something. And try not to leave anything half finished when you go to sleep or something like that. I know it's not always possible because, I'll wake up tomorrow and my interests will be in cars tomorrow, not Home Assistant or what, how it is. And for me, leaving stuff half done when I go to sleep is the enemy because I've loaded it into context, like in my personal RAM buffer or whatever, and loading it back in again is going to take a long time, typically. Sometimes going for a walk or whatever, can be the solution.
Well, you've also got to get the motivation program running again, too. So it's not just the context and the data and the state, but it's also you got to get motivated again.
Also, the caffeination station has to be fired up, too, So, yeah, essentially just break things down into atomic blocks, really.
Yeah, and complete it. One room at a time and complete it as much as you can. That's a great tip.
Yeah. And I find that helps with motivation, too, because if you actually think, right, I've done that, and it works as intended. Next time, you'll be like, oh, well, I actually achieved what I set out to do. And it can be a self-fulfilling cycle of improvement.
I think that's probably how I should probably attack like the rebuild of the sensors and all the switches and stuff in Jupes. It's probably just one room at a time. And it'll go quick.
Also, you are your own worst enemy. Write this down. Document your crap because you will forget. You think you won't. You think you remember it, but trust me, you won't.
You got to write it down. Absolutely agree. I have one bit of wisdom from my Home Assistant's been unavailable. And this is what this guy is worried about. Like it would crash and he just wouldn't have the motivation to fix it. This is something you can do in Z-Wave, but I read how to do it in Zigbee. And this seems like the thing to do. It's called device binding. So you can bind a light switch to a particular light, for example. You can bind two Zigbee devices together so they can control each other without the central coordinator. So as long as they're both on the network and both devices support binding, you can have them operate without Home Assistant even running. And this is incredible because it means like all of like your switches and buttons and those types of things continue to work even if your server's crashed. And so this is definitely something I want to look into for at least a few core devices, like switches to turn lights on and off. Those always need to work. And I don't really have the flexibility to like open it up and like install a Shelby in the wall because my walls are like 2 inches thick. They're thinner than the Shelly is. So I have to go with the soft button route, which means when Home Assistant's down, no light switches, which is crazy, just absolutely crazy. And so something like binding would keep it working and give you the time to continue to operate your stuff without having to actually get the server up and running. And they have groups and all kinds of stuff. And I've read that people also get this working with their Philips Hues, so you can use binding with the Hughes lights as well. I'll have a link in the show notes for more information about binding.
Adopt technologies that you own the firmware of. Tasmotor is a great example. Don't rely on a cloud-based service. Buy the right hardware, all that kind of stuff. Try and buy with the idea that you want it to just keep working until the hardware physically stops working. Would be a great idea.
I like the chat room. Serverless IoT. Nice. It is kind of, isn't it? You're right, Aaron. That's pretty cool. We got some boosts into the show. Check out this. Irero? Ear arrow? I'm so sorry, dude.
Ruh-Roh.
135,000 sats was sent into the show this week. He says, it's
Holy
not a
moly.
I know. In
I'm
fact,
going to buy a boat.
that put us on the hot list. So in Fountain, highly boosted shows, I believe it was this boost, put self-hosted on the hot list, and then new people find the show. So when you send a big boost in, the show trends, and then people discover us. It's really great. So Ruh-Roh writes, it's not $1 million, but these are all the sats I have. I'm currently thinking of automating the lighting around my flat, and I'm unable to pick between smart lights or smart switches. What are the pros and cons of each one? Thanks, Alex, Chris, and Brent.
Fairly easy answer, actually. Switches mean that your bulbs stay powered all the time, and you can control the switch. You retain physical control of the switch, and you also gain the ability to control that switch remotely as well. Whereas if you just go for a smart bulb and someone turns the light switch off, you're out of luck.
Yeah, and it's also just way more approachable by every other single human on the face of the planet. And so if you have anybody else that's going to be in the space with you, what I literally have on my switches here in the studio, I have tape over them that says no touch, because like people just flip light switches all the time. And it still happens when we have a meetup here at the studio. Inevitably, like a listener will just walk out of the studio and they'll just instinctively flip the light switch off. They'll even flip it right through the tape.
Read the FM, huh?
What is it?
RTFM.
Oh,
Even if it's just a bit of tape on the light switch, you got an RTFM.
Yeah, that's true. Read the tape. Prozac boosted with 1,200 sats. Just thanking Alex for sharing your secret sauce. And so I thought, just in case people missed it last episode, we should probably put the Badger Stack link in the show notes for an overview of Alex's setup. People have been liking that. PA or Page Dot boosted in with 3,333 sats. Says, hi, please take a look at the Funk Whale project. It's a federated music service with a great GUI, active development, a subsonic API, mobile app, and financial support. I use it without the federation for my personal library, but I really like it because they really managed to keep me up to date and involve the community in their decisions. I just wanted to share. So I went and looked at it super quick, and I'm going to put this on my checkout. This and Jellyfin, which I realize are not quite the same, but Jellyfin's the Jelly Amp app that people are working on, and this Funk Whale, I think could be great solutions for my music uses, because I'm not so much looking for a whole home sync so much as I am just looking for something that could expose a local music collection to me in a way that I could consume when I want to listen, mostly in the car or on HomePods.
Funk Whale's really nice.
Funkwhale.audio. Are you familiar with it, Alex?
I tried it out once a few months ago, and then just for some reason it didn't stick. I can't remember why. If I might interrupt the boosts for a second, we're having a live question in the chat room.
Breaking news.
What is the boost address? We've got jupiterbroadcasting.com/boost, but then what?
Pew, pew, pew. So you need a new podcast app because it's an RSS feed based thing. So it's in the boost address is in the RSS feed. So you get a new podcast app, and that reads that RSS tag and then automatically adds a button to your playback screen. There's also a browser extension, which I was actually going to suggest to you after the show, Alex, called Alby, A-L-B-Y. And that lets you do it in a browser-based environment. And the reason I was going to mention it to you is they've launched a new platform called Saturn. And I think it's like, I don't know for sure, actually. I have to look at it, but I think it's kind of like having your own node. And then you could get a copy of the messages and a split of the sats with Saturn, I think. And then I don't think you have to set up a whole node, but Alby is an open source project for a Lightning wallet in the browser. I don't generally like it because, I don't like stuff built into the browser, but I had a chance to talk to the co-founder and, ask him my questions about security and open source practices, and actually walked away with a pretty good opinion of where they're at. So ALBY for that. Then you could just, you could boost from the website using our new player on the website. Otherwise, it requires a new podcast app at newpodcastapps.com. And then one day, Alex, I have a dream. Jupiter Broadcasting will be generating all of our own RSS feeds independently. We use a service provider called Fireside right now. It's very common practice to have a service generate your RSS feeds, or like a WordPress plugin or something, because you never want them to screw up. So like people have just like specialized in that because it's like your radio signal. But right now we don't generate our own RSS feed. but we want to. And then we'll start taking advantage of even more podcasting 2.0 features like transcripts and host information in there, like, more of guest information, richer context around that kind of stuff. And a big one that I'm really looking forward to, I don't know what we'll use it for exactly yet, alternative enclosures. So like maybe like an MP4 file or an Opus file if people want an Opus version, or I don't know. But it's so your podcast player it'll see the entry, and then in the player you'll just choose like which format you want, because we can just specify multiple formats in one RSS feed entry with Podcasting 2.0. In the past, and you've probably seen JB has like so many different RSS feeds, because any variation of file type, you had to do a whole new RSS feed, because that's just how these players worked back then. So it's a whole new generation over there. Very excited about it. I think it's going to be big for podcasting. And I think it's the way to keep podcasting decentralized and self-hosted, because the other big trend in the podcasting industry is consolidation with Spotify and players like that. And then they do dynamic ad insertion. They do the hosting. They manage your RSS feed. And the podcaster doesn't have any control over it. And I think decentralization is key to keeping podcasting healthy. And I think self-hosting plays a big role in that. Fun Deck Hermit boosted in with 2,346 sats. Hey guys, I wanted to mention an amazing newish feature of rclone. You can now use a Docker plugin to mount the local or cloud storage directly as a Docker volume. That's great for host isolation and separation. That is great. rclone for the win.
Yeah, so I guess you could use, like Google Drive as a Docker volume. I wonder what the latency's like, but that sounds amazing.
I mean, if you're just writing like an encrypted tar file or something.
Yeah, for something like my smoke ping, history or something like that, that might be nice. That I would like to keep around, but I don't really care that much about it. Maybe. I'll investigate. That sounds pretty cool. Thanks, Fun Deck Hermit.
Last couple boosts for this week, although we did read all of them. We only feature some of them in the show. Soltros boosted with 9,000 sats. I recently got into Docker after refusing to let go of my VM obsession.
Welcome.
Are there any tips out there for use case scenarios or cool project I can run at my home on my Ubuntu home server? Right now I have Nextcloud, Plex, and a few other odds and ends.
Well, over at perfectmediaserver.com, I have a list of my top 10 recommended apps to run on your new media server. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And if you have any other recommendations, let us know at selfhosted.show/contact.
Look at that. And, just keep listening to the show, because as you listen, you'll hear us mention our favorite apps over and over again. Like Alex just name dropped Smoke Ping. That's a great one. It's a classic.
It's funny. I got Smoke Ping from Linux Action Show back in the day, way before you knew me. And then I wrapped it up as a Docker container on linuxserver.io, and then now it's a thing.
I know. And then I grabbed it one day and I'm like, hey, it pings Jupiter Broadcasting. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's why. That's why it pings JB. Because I put you in there, bro.
And it really is a great example of like an app that probably should be in a container, because it's kind of super old and legacy in a lot of ways, and you don't want it on your whole system. Our last boost of the episode came in from Bronzewing, who boosted 9,001 sats, over 9,000. There's another option called Mood, Moode, Moody, perhaps, that runs on a Pi and says it can do multi-room audio. And we have a link in there to moodaudio.org. It's free, and you can get a hi-fi Barry amp and put speakers on that in each room controlled by a web interface. And that interface is mobile-friendly. I hear it's actually better than Volumio. It could be the complete solution. Worth checking out.
It does look nice. Yeah. I think when my Roon free trial expires, which I think I've got another week left on, I think I'll probably have to give Volumio a spin next, and then move on to this Mood thing after that. But I'll be honest with you people, I'm getting a little fatigued with the music situation, and I'll probably just go back to Spotify for a few months whilst I just calm down again.
I'm just going to ship you like 6 HomePods, and you'll be good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know it's not what you want. I know. I also want to say thank you to John A., who sent 2,000 sats. He's going to be switching to Podverse. That is one of those new podcast apps that is totally GPL, web, Android, iOS, and it's an F-Droid. And I really appreciated that when I switched to Graphene. And then Schmidsfeld, who Brent appropriately pronounces, mentioned that it was recently his first boost ever that he sent into the show. And he also is a big fan of replacing the Raspberry Pi with a small, low-power PC. He's had great results, he says. So I will let you guys know how the Odroid H3 Plus works out. I'm super excited about that. And then that old Powerwall or Solar Wall device, I have a couple of ideas, and I think I have a couple outside the box places where I could mount that because it is so rugged too. All projects for future episodes.
That H3 is the type of device that I'm trying to think of a project for that I don't already have a solution for. Like, I want to buy one. I just don't know what I'd use it for. I want one though.
I mean, maybe you'll get lucky and your server will die.
Oh, we can hope.
Hopefully not, dude. Hopefully not. Thank you to our SRE subscribers. Those are our site reliability engineers. You guys make the show possible by investing in our ongoing content production. And as a thank you, we make an ad-free version of the show, and every episode gets a little extra content for the members, a post-show. You can become a member at selfhosted.show/SRE or support all the shows and get ad-free for everything at jupiter.party.
And as you know, selfhosted.show/contact is the place to go to get in touch with us. You can find me over on Twitter at ironicbadger.
Oh, do we want to tease All Things Open at all? Any updates there?
Oh, yeah, we could do. Coming up around Halloween, All Things Open in Raleigh. If you're going to be in town, keep an eye on the meetup page. I don't know if we do the official Jupiter Broadcasting meetup or just the Raleigh room. Probably just the Raleigh room on Matrix.
Could do. Either way.
Myself and Cheese Bacon, longtime friend of the network, will be there. He's supporting a booth for System 76 at the conference. So I'll be at the conference too, and we might go out for a drinky poo in the evening after one of the talks. We'll see.
Wow. Now I want to go. I really wanted to go to All Things Open. It's too much traveling, but I really want to go.
Next year, remember, Halloween, Raleigh, and you'll...
I think so. Also, I'll mention we have our Discord server. You can find that on our self-hosted website, and we also have a couple of self-hosted Matrix chat rooms. That's at jupiterbroadcasting.com/Matrix. And then the podcast itself at Self-Hosted Show on Twitter.
And I do really mean it. I know I say this every single week about thanks for listening, everybody. But genuinely, if you made it this far in the show, thank you very much for listening. This is selfhosted.show/82.